Greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of Garage Tales. Today we're going to work on a starter, and this video was intended to be part of the first engine service video, which, because it got so long, I decided to split in two parts, and now I've decided to fix the starter in its own video. So sorry about all the confusion. I guess you can tell by now I don't know what I'm doing either. But yeah, let's get this starter sorted out quickly. So, taking off the starter is pretty easy. We just have to remove this elbow connector here, 2 bolts, it comes off, and we've got 1 bolt for the starter. We might have another 1 or 2 hidden somewhere, but before that we need to remove the connector from up here, and obviously before we do that we need to remove the negative battery terminal so we don't do any damage. And this is optional, but I'll also remove the cover on top just to give me a better view of what's going on under there. Before I take this elbow off, I'm gonna take this block drain plug out just to make sure there isn't any coolant left in there and make a mess. So I got a drain pan under the bike. Doesn't look like there's anything there, but it was worth double checking. Oh, I was wrong. Right, so that's it. Starter's ready to come out. We've got 2 8mm headed bolts here. It's a little bit grimy. Some bits of paint are flaking off, so we should try and clean this area up before we put the starter back in. So as you can see, taking the cover and everything off wasn't really necessary. You can just pull it out anyway. But having it off gives you a much better view of what's going on, and also gives you the opportunity to clean all that mess up. And there we go. We've got the starter out. So, we've managed to get the starter out, but that mess in there is really bugging me, so before I move on, I'd really like to get this all cleaned up. Right, so that looks much better. Now it's time to move on to the starter. So, I've got the starter on the bench and it needs a good clean. But before I do that, I want to hear what it sounds like outside the bike without any load on it. So there's a chance it might sound fine with no load, but we'll find out in a bit. So I've got 2 jump leads hooked up to the battery. I'm gonna put the negative one right on the front of it, because the rest of it is painted, so it might not have a good contact. And I'm gonna, as soon as I touch the positive side, the other pole, it's gonna spin. So let's hear what it sounds like. So it actually sounds fine. I've got the starter all apart and I gave it a good clean, and I believe I found our issue. This rear bearing just feels a bit notchy, so I believe this might be the source of our noise. The front one feels fine, but I don't think it's the right type. It should be a sealed bearing in there, while this is an open bearing. So we're going to replace both bearings. Chris has found a couple of replacements. We're going to put those in. He also found a new seal which goes on the front of the shaft. And if you look at our old brushes, they're all a bit worn. There's not that much life left in them. Now you can buy this whole plate assembly with new brushes, but that's a bit expensive, so we went for just replacement brushes, which we're going to put on this time, and hopefully this will cure our noisy starter. So whenever you're pressing in new bearings, it's very important to always press on the inner race if you're driving it on a shaft, or on the outer race if you're driving it in a bore. So you always avoid putting stress on the bearing itself. I've got a socket that's the right size for my inner race to drive my bearing home. I apologize for keeping my hand in the way, that was a mistake, but I've got one bearing all the way home, and it's very nice. But sadly we've got a problem with the rear one, which left me a bit surprised. The new bearing just, it doesn't need to be pressed on, and if you look at it, it's got a huge amount of wobble. Now the old bearing was a 608Z, which I'm not sure about, I'm not an expert, but I thought there was supposed to be a ZZ there, and that means the metal shielding on both sides. If it's a single Z, I thought it's a shield only on one side. But regardless, Chris has found a 608 RS, which as far as I knew, the only difference between the two is that the shield isn't metal, it's rubber or a different material, which should do a better job in this case. But it's got other disadvantages that shouldn't really affect us. But yeah, the inner diameter of the new bearing is just miles off. Don't know if you can see on the old one, if I just pinch the inner race and try to move it, even though it's worn, it's pretty good. But on the new bearing, if I pinch the inner race and try to move the outer race, it's got a huge amount of play there. So I'm going to put this down to just a very low quality bearing. So I can also measure the inner diameters on the old bearing. Don't know if you can see that, but it seems to be 7.89, which is probably what it should be. But on the new bearing, it's 8.05 by the looks of it. So it's quite a big difference there. Let's see the outer diameters. This seems to be 21.96. The old one seems to be 21.95, which is probably the same. That's good enough. But the inner diameter is what isn't right for us. So I'm going to look into the bearing specs, but I'm pretty sure this is just a very low quality bearing that we've got here. I'm going to have to find a replacement. So it's an annoying setback with the bearing, but while we wait for a replacement, I might as well replace the seal. So to pull it out, I'm just going to use a seal extractor. So the new seal goes with the sealing face away from the starter, because it's actually meant to keep oil from the engine getting into the starter. So this is the way it goes. Put a bit of oil on the outside of it. not the prettiest thing. I should really improve my soldering skills, but it's functional, it works, does the job. So yeah, happy with that. Let's put it back together now. So there we go. I've got the 2 notches in the plate and the housing aligned. So that's good. And I've got my 2 working brushes. So yeah, happy days. So here we are. I've got a new quality bearing and a new seal. Why a new seal? Well, I've made a mistake. I didn't tell Chris the thickness of the seal. So this is 15 by 24 by 7 mil thick, and we actually need a 5 mil thick one. So that's my fault. I was trying to avoid taking the seal out before I have a new one, but that just meant we had to buy 2 seals. So here it is. I'm going to take this out. It's a brand new seal, but it's going to be scrap once I take it out. Put this in, new quality bearing to replace the new low quality bearing, or no quality I should say. It's just so sloppy. There's no bore in. I don't know if you can see it, but if you actually look through the race, you can see there's such a big gap. You can see right through the bearing. So yeah, new seal, new bearing, and let's put the starter together. So I got the starter back on. I still need to put some bits that I removed earlier, but I just want to see what it sounds like. So let's see what we've done. So I'm not sure how well the camera picks that up. The battery is a bit low, but it just sounds much better. That crunchy sound that we had before is gone. So happy with that. Let's just put everything back together and the job's done. So there we go, I've got the starter back in place, cooling system all connected, everything's ready to go. We could fill this up with coolant, start the engine and warm it up, and do an oil change. But that's a job for another day. Thanks for watching and see you next time.